So we'll be talking about telescopes, we'll be talking about different mounts. There's a couple of types of mounts here. Some of the other telescopes we used to have here have been moved down the hill to the other shed, so I couldn't sort of bring them up here in time to show to you. But we'll be talking about the types of telescopes, mounts, eyepieces, some buzzwords, how to set up the finder, which is this little telescope here, which a lot of people, that's one of the first problems they have because that's not aligned properly. So basically how to use it, and some of the things, if you actually go to buy one, it'll have some words you can sort of fly off the end of your tongue, and the salesman might be a little bit impressed anyway. So you mightn't quite get ripped off. So to start with, the most fundamental thing about a telescope is the aperture. That's how big the lens or the mirror is, the lens at the front or the mirror at the back, how big that is. That's how much light it will capture. So a small telescope that you would get, please don't go there, but like Dick Smith or Big W. Not that there's anything wrong with them, but it's just something wrong with the telescopes they sell. Maybe 50 millimetres in diameter, so they'll have a lens on the front, something like this, and it'll be 50 millimetres across, or 2 inches. You go to slightly bigger telescopes, say 8 inches across, so much bigger. This is probably about a 4.5 inch, so much bigger than that. Going up to some of the telescopes you'll see outside will be 16 inches or even more in size. The 16-inch telescope, if we had one here, the eyepiece would come to about this level if that was pointing directly up. So you're talking 16 inches is a telescope as big as a person. And in some cases, weighs more than a person. Different types of telescopes and mounts. You'll soon see that there's a huge variety of things you can actually purchase. Fundamentally, there's 2 types of telescopes. There's a refractor and a reflector. The reflector has 3 different types of optics. There are a lot of others, but most of them come in 3 different types. There's a Schmidt-Cassegrain, a Maxitov, and a Newtonian. We'll go through each of these as I progress. So this is just to show you just how many different combinations there are. Then there's the mount, what it's mounted on. You can have altazimuth, equatorial, or Dobsonian. And each particular type of telescope comes in various varieties. And then having got all these combinations, you can have it manual, computer controlled, or push to. So you can see there's a huge combination of different types of telescopes that you can buy. So many to choose from. Right? It's a hair-pulling exercise. So we'll start first of all with the types. There's the refractor, Newtonian, Schmidt-Cassegrain, and Maxitov. That's the 4 most popular types of telescopes that people out there will have, and most people will buy. It's probably more than 95% of the types of telescopes. We start with the refractor. That's the most simple. This is a simple refractor here. It has a lens on the front called the objective, which is around here. It has an eyepiece at the back, and it has a diagonal. And the focus, as you move this, it goes in and out. And that brings the objects you're looking at into focus. One of the biggest problems with cheap refractors is when you look at something that's fairly bright, you get this colour, what they call chromatic aberration. So when you try to look at something, you just can't get it clear. It's a sure sign of a really cheap telescope. You don't get very good images at all. Really a waste of money. If you don't spend enough to at least get quality optics, that's the best that you would hope to get. You imagine looking at a star, it would look like that with all this blue and purple fringing around it. And that's caused because the glass that's in the lens of these telescopes, the different colour light is focused at a different distance. So when it's focused, so that say the blue light is in focus, the red light actually focuses further away, and so you get the blue part of the light is in focus, and you get a red fuzzy blur. So like some of you people here that have got blue tops, if you had red as well, you would see the blue is in focus and the green would be a little bit blurry. And as you tried to change the focus, the red would get into focus and the blue would get blurry. So the most common way to fix that is they put another type of glass in there. So there's two different types of glass in the lens. And they focus slightly differently because it's a different type of glass. And you can basically you get a compromise in the focus so that it's still not perfect, but the variation between the red and the blue is a lot less. And so you get a much better image. And that's what they call an achromat, which is you want to at least get the telescope, which is what they have as an achromatic lens on the front. But of course, like most things, the better you want something, the more you have to pay. So in comparison here, if we've got a 100mm telescope, so that would be a telescope a little bit smaller than this, but a refractor. So you imagine it's got a lens about this size on the end. So it's relatively smallish. It would be maybe a little bit longer than this and a little bit bigger. A cheap one, you're looking at $300. You go to a high quality glass, $1,000. If you go to the best quality, $3,000 is where you would start. And yet the telescope is the same size, gathers the same amount of light, but it gives a much better quality image. But you've already gone from $300 to $3,000, and you haven't even put it on anything yet. You can easily go to $10,000 for a relatively small telescope like this. So the optics for a refractor become very, very expensive as you want to get better and better quality. Most of you probably wouldn't even think, I guess, of spending $3,000 on your first telescope. I didn't either. I spent more on the one I've got now, but that's different. So the advantages of refractors are that they're quite portable, because you imagine this whole telescope, I can pick it up in one hand, not a problem. And you can pick it up and you can carry it around the backyard. So it's very portable, so long as it's fairly small, like anything less than about 100mm is fairly easy. If you've got 150, 6 inches across, a lens this big, the telescope could be 2 or 3 metres long. The tube itself could weigh 30 or 40 kilograms perhaps. So not exactly portable. But they're cheap. They're easy to manufacture, but because they're cheap, the manufacture can also be very cheap and you can get very poor quality optics in them. So the disadvantage is that once the lens at the front starts to get fairly big, as this gets bigger, the telescope gets much, much longer. And as it gets longer, it gets heavier and it gets more and more expensive. So getting a slightly bigger telescope, the price just goes up rapidly. The next type is a Newtonian. And that's been around a long time. As you can tell by the name, it was invented by Newton. So it's 400 odd years old in design. And what you have is a mirror at the back. So if I move this is a Newtonian over here. So this will have a mirror. We'll have a mirror sitting at the back here. The light comes in from the stars down here, reflects off the mirror, comes back up the tube, and if you look into the end of these, it's got a cover in it. Anyone that's close will see it's got what they call a spider in the middle. So it's got these 3 little veins. There's a thing in the middle, and that has that mirror here which reflects the light out to the side. So it reflects it out to here. Because there's no point in sending the light back up to the front and you have to peer down here to see anything because your head gets in the way. So Mr. Newton thought of that, and he put this, what they call a diagonal, because it sits diagonally across the end of the telescope, and it bends the light out to the side so your head's not in the way. And the focus, similar to a refractor, you turn this up and down and the tube moves in and out and it focuses the image for you. One of the big advantages is that you can get a much bigger telescope for a lot less money. Considerably less. Like here, you can get a 200mm telescope for perhaps $400. A 200mm refractor, even a cheap one, even the cheapest, nastiest achromat, would still cost more than $1,000 easily. Weigh many times more. But because it uses a mirror, it doesn't suffer from this problem with the light being refracted different amounts. So you don't get that colour, because it's just a mirror. The mirror doesn't care what colour the light is. And the other advantage is that reflectors like this, you can actually make them yourself. You can make the optics, the tubes, you can get cardboard tubes, you can make the whole telescope in a garage at home. Children as young as 10 years have made their own telescopes, perhaps that sort of size, with a little bit of help maybe from Dad. But basically they can easily make their own mirror and everything, which you can't do with a refractor. The disadvantages are that if you've got a fairly large telescope with a large mirror on the back, you have a big piece of glass, and if you keep it inside, particularly in the winter where it's nice and warm, when you take it outside, it's still very warm and it takes a long time for it to cool down. And when you try to focus on a star, all the stars will just waver around because the mirror is still warm. So it could take hours. Some big ones may take up to 8 hours to cool down, which is how long it's dark. So by the time the sun comes up, the mirror has got to temperature and you can start looking at something. So you might have to take it out or leave it outside permanently in an observatory or something like that if it's a very big one. They can also be very heavy. You imagine a large piece of glass like this, which may be this thick, can weigh many kilograms, more than what that meteorite weighs. And of course you don't want to drop it because, not that it won't break a toe, it's that it'll break easily because it's just glass. And the other problem with reflectors is sometimes, depending on the design, the eyepiece can get in very awkward positions, particularly with larger ones. The advantage of the refractor is that the eyepiece is always at the back of the telescope. So unless you're pointed directly upwards, the eyepiece is usually at a fairly convenient position. If this is a much larger telescope, sometimes this eyepiece you might find is pointing directly down at the ground. And the only way to look at it is you've got to bend down and look up. Don't know about you, but I'm a bit beyond that. I don't have a flip-top head. They also have other problems. That little spider at the front causes what they call diffraction spikes. So when you focus on a star, it has a little cross on it. All the bright stars have little crosses. The refractors don't. When you focus on a star, it's a dot. So you can see here, this is the sort of thing I'm talking about. If you look at bright stars in a reflector, something like this, the bright ones have this little cross, and that's caused by the light going past these veins. One way to get around it is if you have curved veins, then you still get these spikes, but they're actually smeared all the way around. So you don't actually see them. So it just hides that problem with the reflector. Another type is the catadioptric or the cat, which we don't have a cat here at the moment. But it's sort of similar to the Newtonian. But it's halfway between the reflector, or the refractor, and the reflector. So it has a mirror on the back, but it has a lens, a special lens on the front. And how that works, the light comes through this piece of glass on the front, and it gets slightly bent, comes down to the back, goes onto the mirror, it's bent further again, comes back up the tube again, and then on the back of this glass at the front is another mirror which sends the light back down the tube. So the eyepiece actually sits at the back of the telescope. So it's like a refractor. So you don't get the eyepiece around here, so it's not usually in an awkward position. It's like a refractor, the eyepiece comes out at the back. So it's much more comfortable. And the focus is the same sort of mechanism as you focus the eyepiece. Well, actually with these, the eyepiece doesn't move in and out, the mirror moves in and out, so the mirror slides up and down in order to get focus. One big advantage of that is because the light doesn't just come down and get bent once, it actually gets bent, comes down, gets bent, reflected back, bent again. The telescope is much, much shorter because the light goes up and down several times. So the whole telescope is much, much shorter. You can get a very big telescope, like mine, which is 11 inches across. So the front is this big, and the telescope's only that long. So it's not even as long as this tube, and yet it's many times larger because the light goes back and forth 3 times inside it. Because it doesn't have that spider, because that mirror is actually attached to the back of the glass. So you don't get those spikes. So whereas with a Newtonian like this, you get something like that. With a cat, you get an image more like that. You don't get that smearing, so you get a much clearer image. The disadvantage is, firstly, they're much more expensive, but also because you've got glass at the front and the mirror here, it's all enclosed. When you take the tube outside, the air inside is still warm and it can't get out. So that air takes a long time to cool down. And until it cools down, you can't see stars or planets or anything like that very clearly because you've got this warm air sitting inside. And there's nowhere, you can't take the lens off the front. At least with a reflector, there's nothing on the front and the warm air can just flow out. So it's sealed in there. And also because it's got the glass on the front, it can fog up. That's happened to me sometimes when looking at stars and all of a sudden it disappears and I think, it's gone cloudy. And there's no clouds. And you look at the glass on the front and it's completely fogged over. You can't see anything, so you get your little hairdryer out and blow it carefully onto the front lens to evaporate all the moisture away. And because you've got a lens on the front and the mirror on the back, they are heavy, much heavier, because you've got 2 large pieces of glass.